430,198, 430,199. Okay. After getting terrible looks from everyone in the theater, I'm finally back and I'm super excited to talk about this movie. That joke won't make any sense unless you watch my last video. Also, why do I feel... Why do I feel more brandable all of a sudden? I'm just gonna say it right off the bat. Spider-Man Across the Spiderverse deserves animated film of the year. And believe me, I tried to do a spoiler-free script, but I want to make sure that this video is worth your time, and doing so just felt like there was no substance in what I was saying, so I'm gonna keep the spoilers for the movie light in the beginning of the video and escalate it as it goes along. I'll give you fair warning when I'm about to tackle the story, but seriously people, holy spider. Go watch this movie and come back to this video. Like, now. It is so damn worth it. Holy hell. But that was expected. The real question is, does this movie live up to the first one? And if it does, is it even better? That question is very easy to answer if we're just talking about the visuals, because if you thought the art direction of Into the Spider-Verse slapped, then get ready to be hit by the semi-truck of Across the Spider-Verses. They completely changed the visual aesthetic of Gwen Stacy's Instagram filtery Earth from the first movie and switched it out into this incredible painted art style, and oh my god, I don't even care that it's not consistent with the first movie. It is so much better that it really doesn't matter. The way that the colors would shift from an acrylic painted style in a standard scene and change into watercolors, where the colors reflected a character's feelings whenever a heart-to-heart was happening, it is so freaking good! On a side note, I got heavy Intergalactic vibes from it, and also, as a side note, you should check out Intergalactic if you're an adult human person. Even in Miles' Earth, 1610, one where we already had a well-thought-out art style from the first movie, they spent time to touch up areas of it that they just didn't have time to before. Things like reflections and various materials have received massive visual upgrades that are absolutely blink and you'll miss it, but 100% worth it for audience members who pay attention to those sorts of details. That deserves its own praise to the animators who spent time to make sure that these finishing touches were made when it was already leaps and bounds ahead of the competition. And with the immense amount of spider people in this movie, we also got way more art styles than we ever had in the first one, and all of them kicked ass. Shout out to that Lego Earth especially, that couldn't have been easy to get the rights for. Mumbattan and its Spider-Man were excellently done, and don't even get me started on Spider-Punk. In fact, this section of the video could go on for well over an hour, so I'm just gonna move on and start talking about the story, so fair warning on specific story spoilers from here on out. First and foremost, the first few minutes of the movie were probably the best opening it could have gotten. In addition to the neat visuals, it was also a great idea to reframe the story from Gwen's perspective. It helped establish the antagonist and hit home the emotional weight of her trauma compared to the first movie, who used it more simplistically to explain her standoffish personality. It also reinforced why revealing yourself as a Spider-Person to someone you love could have a terrible outcome, and in turn justified Miles' reluctance to do so. And speaking of the beginning of the movie, early on, the film has so many great references to fan-favorite jokes and moments from the first movie, and they managed to show them in a way that felt natural and not at all forced or rehashed. The fact that they managed to turn that simple bagel joke into a driving force of a primary antagonist, and it played perfectly with catching the audience off guard with the intensity of the threat he would become, shows just how well thought out the writing was for each of the characters. And yeah, the characters were just as strong and real as ever. His mom Rio played a much bigger role this time around, and it made the ending of the movie so much more emotionally impactful when Miles reveals his secret. This didn't get in the way of his dad's impact either, as he's not only the driving force of the second half of the movie's conflict, but we also get to see what Miles would become without his father's heart and moral compass to guide him, making Miles' effort to save him all the more meaningful. Additionally, the side characters like Spider-Punk and Spider-Man India were great additions to the cast. Despite what little screen time they had, the writers made use of every line of dialogue to their fullest potential, and they were super likable, which is exactly what Penny, Spider-Ham, and Noir did so effectively in the first movie. I especially liked how they utilized Spider-Punk, because instead of making him this romantic rival like Miles first perceived him to be, we see that there's a lot more going on to his character, where he's a lot more competent and intelligent than anyone gives him credit for, even acting as a mentor of sorts to Miles. On that note, we also got to see Miles getting increasingly into his element as Spider-Man, even if he's not fully there yet, and I thought it was great how they showed how he was getting increasingly annoyed and disconnected with his local community and just wanting to spread his wings, man, to make his way back to his multiverse friends. They didn't get to wrap up that arc of bringing his head back to the ground, but I'm sure that they'll cover that in the next one since there was a lot going on from the Spot and Spider-Force. Speaking of that, let's talk about Miguel O'Hara, a man so dedicated to following canon, he's the certified hero of anti-fanfic posters everywhere. In general, he's a great subversive antagonist. He's Spider-Man, so you'd figured he'd always do the right thing, since that's what Spider-Man does. But Miguel's an example of what if Spider-Man did the wrong things for the right reasons. This moral gray area of letting all these people die because supposedly it had to be that way to save billions in that dimension was a great way to build an understanding motive that set him at odds with Miles, a Spider-Man who did the right thing simply because it was the right thing. What if Miles saves his dad and the entire universe collapses, killing everyone? That's an understandable precaution for Miguel to have, and it's equally understandable for Miles to question Miguel's logic, considering that he himself was an anomaly, and yet his universe didn't collapse when he broke his canon, so what if there's something more at play than Miguel realizes? And that's a good point. Miguel has such inflated ego that he views other spider people as just pieces of a universe, and thinks of himself as its main player. He constantly says how he's the only one holding it all together and doesn't even consider that he might have a flawed understanding of what binds the Spider-Verse. One thing that I think that the movie could have done better though was giving us more background on who Miguel was and how he got his powers. Yeah, they showed that he lost his daughter, so that's why he started dimension hopping in the first place, but that's all we really got to know about him besides the unexplained injections. I know you can read the comics if you want to know more about him, but considering that they managed to fit Penny Parker, Spider-Noir, and Spider-Ham's origin, personalities, and values within the span of less than 2 minutes in the last movie, I don't think that that was too much of an ask. They might go into it in the next movie, but either way, it's not in this one, so I can only go off of what we have, not what we might have later. I also love how they handled the Spot. It was such a great idea to take this villain that people immediately think is a stupid, ridiculous joke, and show just how consequential that line of thinking can be to try and diminish someone in pain's value. Yeah, he's a bad guy, and he knows that he's supposed to be, but if Miles just treated him with a bit more mutual respect that he had for him, then maybe the events of this movie would have never happened. His shift in personality from a quirky wannabe villain to this dimension-ending monster was also marvelously done. I didn't find it at all jarring, which was a big surprise considering how bad it could have gone in the wrong writer's hands. So while I did love the Spot, I did have a problem with how the movie kinda just decided he wasn't gonna be in the movie anymore about halfway through. Miguel literally says, "Don't talk about the Spot, he'll worry about the Spot," and I guess that must have been true because we literally see him one more time to establish the impending doom of Earth 1610. I mean, it's fine, there was already a lot going on in the movie. I'm just surprised that it wasn't more spaced out or made clear that there were other spider people on the case to try and impede his progress, rather than just making it seem like they let him go for the rest of the movie. There was also another issue I had with the story, and it was about a major decision that a particular character made that was pretty whack. Something that the last movie did really well is that even for the antagonists, they made sure that each character's motivations were known and that their choices were not only understandable, but logical next steps for the characters to make based on who they were. With this in mind, Miguel's motives were clear, and while it was flawed, you could understand why he was doing what he was doing. However, he wants to maintain order within the multiverse at all costs and not have these canon events interrupted. And yet, instead of just sending Miles back home after he interrupted one, like Gwen suggested, Miguel instead brought Miles into their HQ for seemingly no reason other than telling him all about these canon events, confirming that his father was supposed to die, exactly when it was supposed to happen, and expecting him to do literally nothing about it. Riddle me this, Batman. How was that the best choice for Miguel to make? Yeah, Miles knew about his father's death thanks to the future sight from the spot, but he didn't know when it was gonna happen, and besides, he just undid something from that vision. Wouldn't it have just been better to let Miles believe that the spot was just getting into his head and that it wasn't going to actually happen, or at the very least, not tell him the exact time he needed to be on guard to prevent it from happening? And just to be double, triple sure, send some spider people in to make sure that Miles didn't make it in time? Heck, I just thought about this. He didn't even actually know that Miles got the vision from the spot, so why did he suddenly get this bright idea to freak him out at the worst possible time? Is he stupid? I get that Miguel wanted to make sure that Miles couldn't stop it by trapping him there, but this line of logic just doesn't make any sense to me when he didn't know anything about the vision and easily could have just told him about canon events after the one he wanted to make sure happened. Also, side note, and maybe more of a nitpick, but I wasn't the biggest fan of Peter B in this movie. It felt like he was just kind of there most of the time, which was weird since he was so important in the first one. I honestly might have preferred it if he wasn't in the movie at all until the end when Gwen shows up asking for his help to save Miles. I could go on and on about Across the Spider-Verse. This video could have easily been over an hour, and I feel like I barely got a touch on everything I wanted to, but I think I'm gonna have to save that for another day. Let me know in the comments if you'd like a more in-depth analysis of the core message of the movie, but for now, its story does live up to the excellent standards that was set up in the first one. It was creative and daring in areas that Into the Spider-Verse couldn't be as an introduction, well, Into the Spider-Verse, making it an excellent follow-up. That said, did I like it more than Into the Spider-Verse? After seeing it twice, I still think narratively, Into the Spider-Verse is my favorite of the two, and this is just kind of inherent for me with movies that are of a part 1 and part 2 variety. Across the Spider-Verse and Beyond the Spider-Verse combined are a sequel to Into the Spider-Verse. This is why for me, Across the Spider-Verse, while an excellent movie, got the short end of the stick since its ending wasn't really a conclusion and goes off with some major cliffhangers rather than just teases of what's to come. Splitting it into 2 parts really hampered several aspects of the movie that I think that the first one did perfectly as a standalone. Into the Spider-Verse's emotional core and message were clear and distinctive, while also tying them absolutely perfectly into a Spider-Man narrative. The second movie had heart and something to say for sure, but without the full story, it was a lot less clear than the first one, and now there's an expectation for the audience to remember all the various emotional arcs of Across the Spider-Verse and/or waste time retreading them in the third movie to catch people up. This just doesn't sound like a favorable solution either way. Into the Spider-Verse was a movie that can wholly stand on its own, but here, I feel like this film isn't going to be able to do so in the same way without needing to watch the next one too. To be totally honest with you, I don't know why they couldn't have just split the Spider-Force and Spot storylines into 2 different movies and just have Across the Spider-Verse be its own complete sequel rather than a 2-parter. It's not like the events of Across the Spider-Verse couldn't have happened without the Spot being there. Gwen could have just visited Miles for no other reason than wanting to see him again, and instead of hunting the Spot in Mumbattan, they could have just been hunting an anomaly, and the rest of the film could have played off similarly, minus the ending. Miguel already hated Miles for breaking his rule of canon, and the second half of the movie's conflict had nothing to do with the Spot anyway, so why not? It could have still flowed nicely into a complete third film, with Miles being on edge trying to find which dangerous villain was going to be killing his dad, and therefore not taking the Spot seriously, only to, over the course of the movie, lead to the events of what Beyond the Spider-Verse will end up being. Boom! I just made 2 complete sequels right there using the same story. Give me money, Sony. Despite all of this, thanks to the great references and impeccable writing, it's hands down my favorite first part of a 2-parter, and for that, combined with the best visuals of any animated movie I've ever seen, I'm giving Across the Spider-Verse a 9 out of 10. It may have struggled in places that the first one did right, but it took that groundwork and ran further and faster than what came before, making it maybe a perfect sequel? We won't know the answer to that question until the next part in 2024. Anyway, shout out to Bajà Blast, Ravixe, and all my other Patreons. Please like and subscribe if you haven't already, and happy Pride Month, y'all. Hope you do something nice for yourself, and I'll see you all on the hex side.